My name is Nate, and at 34 years old, I learned that the loudest people in the room are usually the weakest. I sat across from my brother-in-law at one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city, watching him slide a thick white envelope across the pristine tablecloth. He told me there was $10,000 inside. He called it a stimulus package for my pathetic life, bragging loudly about his new seven-figure salary as the chief executive officer of OmniTech. He wanted me to feel small. But what Desmond did not know was that I am the founder and majority shareholder of Aegis Holdings, the venture capital firm that recently acquired OmniTech. I literally own the company he works for, and I personally authorized his hiring package just to see how much rope he would need to hang himself. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stay silent and smile while arrogant family members underestimated your worth. Trust me, you will want to hear how this dinner ended. Growing up, I learned the value of quiet wealth. I drive a 10-year-old Ford by choice. I wear plain black cotton shirts because they are comfortable. My work in venture capital allows me to operate entirely behind the scenes, pulling strings and restructuring failing tech companies without ever putting my face on a magazine cover. My wife Clara knows everything. But to her family, my desire for a simple, unflashy lifestyle is a symptom of failure. To them, I am just a freelance investor who plays with pennies on a laptop all day while Clara settles for less than she deserves. The contrast was impossible to ignore tonight. Desmond is a tall, imposing African-American man who demands attention the second he walks into a room. Tonight he was wearing a custom-tailored Italian suit that cost more than my first car and a heavy gold watch he made sure to flash every time he picked up his water glass. Next to him sat Olivia, Clara's older sister. Olivia is the undisputed golden child of the family, a woman who treats her husband's corporate title as her own personal royalty status. Desmond tapped the thick white envelope with his manicured index finger. "Take it, Nate," he said, his voice carrying just enough volume to ensure the tables next to us could hear. "Consider it a charitable donation. I know things have been tight for you." I looked at the envelope and then up at Desmond. He leaned back in his leather chair with a smug grin that made my blood boil, though I kept my face perfectly neutral. "I do not need your money, Desmond," I said quietly. "Oh, please, Nate, do not let your fragile male ego get in the way of a handout," my mother-in-law, Patricia, chimed in. She took a delicate sip of her expensive red wine, looking at me with undisguised pity. "Desmond makes a massive salary now. He is trying to elevate this family to his level. The least you could do is accept his charity so you can finally get rid of that rusted piece of junk you call a car. It is genuinely embarrassing when you park that awful Ford in our driveway." Clara shifted uncomfortably in the seat next to me. I could feel the tension radiating from her. "Mom, please stop it," Clara said, keeping her voice low. "Nate works incredibly hard. We do just fine financially. We did not come to dinner to be insulted." My father-in-law, Richard, let out a harsh, dismissive laugh. He placed his heavy hands on the table and glared at me. "Olivia is right to be proud of her husband, Clara. Look at Desmond. He is running a multi-million-dollar tech empire. He is a real man providing a real future for your sister. Nate is 34 years old and still dressing like a college student. Take the money, Nate. Pay off whatever debts you have drowned my daughter in, and try to show some gratitude for once." I looked around the table at the four faces staring back at me. Patricia and Richard looked at Desmond like he was a god who had descended from the heavens to grace their family tree. They truly believed that a fancy title and a leased sports car made him untouchable. They had spent the entire evening treating the restaurant staff like peasants barking orders and complaining about the lighting, completely unaware of the irony. They thought they held all the power. They thought I was a defeated man staring at a pile of cash I desperately needed. I picked up the envelope, feeling the weight of the crisp bills inside. I could have ripped it up. I could have thrown it in his face. But as a businessman, I knew that the best way to destroy an enemy was to let them think they were winning. I placed the envelope gently back onto the table, smoothing out a small crease on its corner. Thank you for the generous offer, Desmond, I said, my voice steady and completely devoid of the humiliation they were hoping for. But my Ford runs just fine, and we do not need your charity. Please put it towards something useful. Clara squeezed my hand under the table, her knuckles white. She looked across the table at her sister and brother-in-law, her eyes flashing with a protective anger that made me love her even more. You guys are unbelievable, Clara said, her voice shaking slightly. Nate has been nothing but kind to this family. He works on his own terms. We own our home. We do not have debt. Just because he does not wear a suit and tie to an office every day does not mean he is failing. You have no idea what he actually does or how successful he is. Olivia let out a sharp, mocking laugh. Oh, please, Clara, stop embarrassing yourself, Olivia sneered. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table so the light would catch her massive diamond engagement ring. We all know what freelance investor means. It means unemployed. It means sitting on the couch trading crypto with $50 while you work full-time at that little marketing agency to keep the lights on. Do not try to defend him when Desmond is sitting right here offering you a literal lifeline. Desmond puffed out his chest, taking a slow sip of his bourbon. Let her talk, Olivia, he said with a patronizing smirk. If Clara wants to pretend her husband is a provider, let her. But in the real world, success is measured by actual results. And my results speak for themselves. I was just headhunted by the board of OmniTech. Do you even know what OmniTech is, Nate? It is a global software giant. The board practically begged me to take the CEO position. They gave me a 7-figure base salary, massive stock options, and an executive expense account that could buy your entire neighborhood. I listened to him brag, filing away every single word. It was genuinely fascinating to watch a man hang himself with such enthusiasm. What Desmond did not realize was that I was the one who approved that exact compensation package. I remembered the email thread where my board members debated whether he was too arrogant for the role. I had been the one to argue that his aggressive nature might be useful for the short-term restructuring phase. I was currently regretting that decision. That is an impressive package, Desmond, I said, keeping my expression perfectly neutral. OmniTech is a massive organization, but from what I have read in the financial journals recently, the company was just acquired by a private equity firm. Aegis Holdings, I believe. I leaned forward slightly, resting my forearms on the table. And rumor has it that the new owners are incredibly ruthless about budget cuts. I heard they are actively auditing all executive expense accounts because the previous leadership was wasting millions on personal luxury. The smug smile on Desmond's face faltered for a fraction of a second. His hand, which had been resting confidently on his bourbon glass, twitched. I continued, my voice calm and conversational. In fact, I read that the new board of directors issued a strict directive just last week. All unauthorized corporate spending over $5,000 requires direct approval from the majority shareholder. So handing out $10,000 in cash at a family dinner seems a bit risky, does it not? I would hate for the board to think you are treating company funds like a personal piggy bank so soon after you were hired. A heavy silence fell over the table. Patricia and Richard looked confused, clearly not understanding the corporate terminology, but sensing the sudden shift in the atmosphere. Olivia frowned, looking from me to her husband. Desmond recovered quickly, though his jaw was visibly clenched. He let out a loud, forced chuckle. You really should stop reading those internet conspiracy blogs, Nate. You have absolutely no idea how corporate governance works. The board loves me. I am the CEO. I make the rules. Aegis Holdings brought me in to modernize the company, and they trust my judgment completely. I have total autonomy. I can spend $100,000 tonight and no one would even blink an eye. I simply smiled. Total autonomy, I repeated softly. That is definitely a bold way to run a company. You are just jealous, Olivia snapped, glaring at me. You are sitting there making up stories about his company because you cannot handle the fact that my husband is a millionaire and you are a nobody. Just give me the envelope back, Desmond. If they want to live in poverty, let them. Desmond snatched the envelope off the table and shoved it into the inner pocket of his custom suit jacket. "Suit yourself, Nate," he said, his eyes narrowing with pure venom. "But do not come crying to me when your rusty car finally breaks down and you cannot afford the tow truck." I watched him pat the pocket of his custom jacket where the $10,000 now sat. He was trying to project absolute power, but the slight, almost imperceptible tremor in his hand gave him away. He was rattled. My casual comment about the Aegis Holdings audit had struck a nerve, likely because he was already expensing personal luxury items he should not be touching. But men like Desmond do not back down when they feel threatened. Their fragile egos cannot handle even a hint of vulnerability. Instead, they puff out their chests and go on the offensive. Desmond grabbed his empty bourbon glass and slammed it down on the table, signaling the waiter. The waiter, a young man who looked thoroughly exhausted by Desmond's behavior all evening, practically sprinted over. "We will not be needing the dessert menus," Desmond commanded, his voice deliberately loud enough to silence the gentle hum of conversation at the surrounding tables. "In fact, you can bring the check right now. And bring it to him." Desmond pointed a rigid manicured finger directly at me across the table. Clara stiffened beside me, her breath catching in her throat. "Desmond, what are you doing?" she asked, her voice tight with disbelief and anger. "You invited us here to celebrate your new job. You specifically told us that dinner was on you." Olivia let out a sharp, dramatic sigh, rolling her eyes as she adjusted her designer shawl. "Oh, relax, Clara. If your husband wants to act like he is some big-shot corporate insider who knows all about OmniTech's internal finances, he should have the bank account to back it up. Let him pay. It is the least he can do after insulting my husband." Richard nodded heavily in agreement, crossing his arms over his broad chest. "It is a matter of respect, Clara. Nate sits here wearing a cheap, collarless shirt, turning down a $10,000 gift from a highly successful man, and then has the nerve to criticize how Desmond runs his own company. If Nate is so financially secure, picking up the tab for one nice meal should be easy. Prove you are a man, Nate. Be a provider for once, instead of an anchor weighing my daughter down." I kept my face perfectly still, observing them like a scientist studying a group of volatile lab rats. Desmond had spent the entire evening ordering the most expensive items on the menu. He had demanded a $300 bottle of imported Cabernet without asking anyone else what they wanted to drink. He had ordered Wagyu beef and caviar appetizers, loudly explaining to the restaurant staff that he only consumed the finest ingredients now that he was an executive. The bill was going to be massive. Desmond leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. The smug, predatory look had returned to his dark eyes. "You see, Nate, this is the real world. In the real world, men who provide get to make the rules. I offered you a hand up because I pitied you. I pitied Clara for having to settle for a man with zero ambition. But since you want to bite the hand that feeds you, you can pay for the privilege. Let us see if that freelance investor money can cover a Michelin star tab. Or maybe you will have to call the restaurant manager and offer to wash dishes in the kitchen to pay off your debt." Patricia chuckled, a dry, grating sound that made my jaw clench. "Do not be ridiculous, Desmond. They do not let people with his wardrobe wash dishes in a place like this. Nate, if you cannot afford it, just apologize to Desmond right now. Tell him you were wrong, accept his financial gift, and let him handle the bill like a real gentleman would." Clara grabbed her purse from the back of her chair, her face flushed with absolute outrage. "We are leaving," she announced, standing up abruptly. "Nate, do not give them a single dime. We will pay for our own meals and they can pay for theirs. I am not going to sit here and let my own parents treat my husband like a second-class citizen." I reached up and gently placed my hand on Clara's arm, guiding her back into her seat. I kept my eyes locked on Desmond the entire time. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. This was exactly what Desmond wanted. He wanted a public spectacle where he could assert his dominance and watch me crumble under the weight of an expensive bill. To my in-laws, paying for this meal was an impossible feat for a guy who drove an old Ford. They assumed I would sweat panic and ultimately beg Desmond for mercy. I did not sweat. I did not panic. I looked at the man who was currently embezzling funds from my own company. A man who thought his rented luxury made him a king, and I felt a profound sense of calm. The waiter returned looking incredibly awkward, holding a black leather billfold. He hesitated, glancing nervously between Desmond and me, clearly unsure of who the actual host of the evening was. "Bring it here, please," I told the waiter, my voice polite and completely even. The waiter visibly relaxed and walked over to my side of the table, placing the leather folder next to my water glass. Desmond sat back in his chair, folding his arms with a victorious smirk. Olivia pulled out her phone and started typing frantically, likely gossiping about us to her wealthy friends. "Go ahead, Nate," Desmond mocked, gesturing toward the billfold. "Let us see what kind of man you really are. Let us see if you can take care of your wife for one single evening without my help." I slowly reached for the leather folder, savoring the absolute certainty in their eyes that I was about to be humiliated. They had demanded I prove I was a man. They were about to learn exactly who they were dealing with. I opened the black leather folder. The itemized receipt stretched down the entire page, detailing the expensive Wagyu beef, the imported caviar, and the $300 bottles of wine Desmond had practically inhaled. The total sat at the bottom in bold black ink: $2,450. It was a staggering amount for a single dinner, especially for someone my in-laws firmly believed was unemployed and struggling to make ends meet. I did not flinch. I did not even blink. I calmly reached into my wallet and pulled out a plain, heavy metal card. It was matte black, with no bank logo, no flashy gold lettering, and no credit limit. It was a direct line to my private wealth management account, at a tier that men like Desmond did not even know existed. I placed the heavy metal card on top of the receipt and handed the folder back to the waiter. "Thank you," I said evenly. "No need to rush." The waiter nodded and hurried off toward the register. Across the table, Desmond was staring at me, his dark eyes narrowed as if trying to solve a complex puzzle. I could see the gears turning in his head. He had fully expected me to check my banking app in a panic, maybe ask to split the bill, or sweat profusely while making up an excuse. My absolute indifference to the massive number on that paper was throwing him entirely off balance. "Wow!" Olivia scoffed, breaking the heavy silence. Her tone was sharp, defensive, and dripping with venom. "I guess someone just emptied out their emergency fund to save face. I hope you guys do not need groceries for the next few months, Clara, because your husband just spent your rent money on our appetizers." Desmond let out a loud, booming bark of laughter, instantly seizing on Olivia's rationalization to protect his own fragile ego. "That has to be it," he said, pointing a finger at me across the table. "You really just blew your life savings to look cool for 5 minutes. That is genuinely pathetic, Nate. True wealth is not about maxing out a credit card you cannot afford to pay off just to impress a guy like me. It is about sustainable income. Like my 7-figure corporate salary. You just set yourself back a year financially just to prove a point. I almost feel bad for you." Patricia sighed heavily, shaking her head as she picked up her designer clutch. "This is exactly what we mean about poor financial planning, Clara. Your father and I worry about your future constantly. Look at the reckless decisions he makes when his pride is hurt." Richard grunted his agreement, standing up and buttoning his suit jacket. "A fool and his money are soon parted." Although in Nate's case it does not look like there was much money to begin with. I simply smiled, resting my hands comfortably on the table. The waiter returned much faster than anticipated. His entire demeanor had shifted dramatically. He was no longer just polite. He was highly deferential. People who handle high-tier wealth management cards know exactly what they are swiping. He bowed slightly as he handed the leather folder back to me, presenting the pen with both hands as if offering a sword to a king. "Thank you, sir." The waiter said, his voice hushed and incredibly respectful. "It is an absolute honor to have you dine with us tonight. If you need anything else, please let management know directly." Desmond frowned, deep lines forming on his forehead. Waiters did not bow for a $2,000 bill even in a Michelin star restaurant. They definitely did not offer direct lines to management for a guy wearing a plain cotton shirt. But before Desmond could question the bizarre interaction, Olivia stood up dramatically, throwing her expensive cashmere coat over her shoulders. "Let us go, Desmond," she said, grabbing his arm. "The valet is bringing the Porsche around. I cannot stand the smell of desperation any longer." We all walked out of the restaurant and into the cool evening air. The valet area was crowded with high-end luxury vehicles. A sleek silver Porsche Panamera rolled up to the curb, its engine purring loudly. Desmond tossed a crisp $50 bill to the valet driver, making sure everyone saw the denomination. He opened the passenger door for Olivia, shooting me one last look of absolute superiority. "Enjoy the ride home in that rust bucket," Nate Desmond called out over the loud engine noise. "Let me know if you need me to call a tow truck when it breaks down on the highway." Richard and Patricia followed right behind them, climbing into their pristine Mercedes SUV. They did not even bother to say goodbye to Clara. They just pulled away, following the silver Porsche into the busy city traffic. Clara and I stood alone on the curb as the valet pulled up my 10-year-old Ford. It rattled slightly as it idled the faded blue paint, looking incredibly dull under the bright streetlights. Clara got into the passenger seat, slamming the heavy car door harder than necessary. She was trembling with anger, tears of sheer frustration shining in her eyes. "Why do you let them talk to you like that? Nate," she demanded, her voice cracking. "Why did you not just tell them the truth? Why did you pay for their ridiculous meal when they treat you like garbage?" I started the engine, putting the old car into gear. I reached over and gently wiped a tear from her cheek. "Because Clara," I said softly, "when your enemy is digging his own grave, the worst thing you can do is take away his shovel." I pulled out onto the road, steering with one hand while I pulled out my phone with the other. I drafted a quick single-sentence email to the lead financial auditor at Aegis Holdings. It read, "Initiate a full forensic review of the OmniTech CEO expense accounts immediately." I hit send, tossed the phone into the cup holder, and smiled into the night. The trap was set. 2 days later, the jaws of that trap began to close. Patricia called Clara with a non-negotiable demand. The family was heading to Emerald Cove Golf Resort for a weekend getaway. Patricia insisted it was a mandatory trip to officially celebrate Desmond's new job and that our absence would be seen as an unforgivable insult. Clara wanted to refuse, but I gently encouraged her to pack a bag. I needed to see exactly how Desmond operated when he thought he had unlimited power. Plus, my audit team at Aegis Holdings needed a few days to quietly process his initial expense reports. A weekend away was the perfect distraction. We arrived at the resort on a bright Friday afternoon. Emerald Cove was the kind of place that required a massive membership fee just to pull into the paved driveway. The main lodge was built from imported stone and cedar, overlooking a pristine 18-hole golf course situated right on the ocean cliff. Desmond was already in the grand lobby when we walked in, holding court with the front desk manager like a visiting king. Olivia stood next to him, sipping a flute of complimentary champagne and acting like she owned the building. Desmond turned around and saw us walking toward him. "Oh good, you actually made it," he announced loudly, making sure the concierge could hear him. "I was worried that old Ford of yours had finally given up on the highway. We would have sent a taxi, but I am not sure they go out to your neighborhood." Richard and Patricia chuckled as they walked over from the lounge area. Desmond held up a stack of heavy gold keycards, fanning them out like a winning poker hand. "I took care of all the arrangements," he said smoothly. He handed 2 cards to my in-laws. "You guys are in the Ocean View Master Suite. Enjoy the private balcony and the complimentary spa access." Then he turned to Olivia and smirked. "And we are in the presidential penthouse, babe. Top floor. Private hot tub and a dedicated butler." He then reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a single flimsy plastic keycard. He held it out to me with a look of mock sympathy. "And for the 2 of you, I managed to secure a spot in the annex. It is a bit cozy, but hey, a free vacation is a free vacation, right? I know you guys do not get to travel much on a freelance budget." "Now, Clara, do not give Desmond that sour look," Patricia scolded, stepping forward to adjust her silk scarf. He worked incredibly hard to get where he is. You should be grateful he included you at all instead of complaining about the accommodations. Honestly, the annex is probably an upgrade from your rental house anyway. Olivia chimed in, tossing her hair over her shoulder. Just enjoy the fresh air and try not to bother the real guests. Clara snatched the card from his hand without saying a word. We dragged our luggage past the luxury boutiques, past the grand sweeping staircase, and out a side door near the loading docks. The annex Desmond had mentioned was not actually a guest building. It was a block of overflow rooms, normally reserved for the resort's seasonal landscaping staff. The hallway smelled faintly of industrial bleach and wet grass. We opened the door to room 104. It was barely larger than a walk-in closet. There was a single full-sized bed pushed against a cinder-block wall, a buzzing fluorescent light overhead, and a window that looked directly out onto the employee dumpster. The contrast between this concrete box and the marble lobby we had just left was staggering. Clara dropped her duffel bag onto the thin, stained carpet. "I am going to kill him," she whispered, her voice trembling with absolute rage. "I am going to march back into that lobby and throw this plastic keycard directly at his smug face. This is beyond disrespectful, Nate. This is deliberate humiliation. My parents are just letting him treat us like the hired help." I walked over to the small laminate desk in the corner and picked up the resort welcome packet left for the staff. I let out a low, dark chuckle. "Clara, look at this," I said. I handed her a piece of paper that had been mistakenly left behind by whoever quickly prepared the room. It was a printout of the master booking ledger for our party. The ledger showed the rooms booked under Desmond's name. The presidential penthouse was billed at $4,000 a night. The Ocean View suite was $2,000. And right there listed clearly as the payment method was an OmniTech corporate routing number. Desmond was not just treating his family to a lavish weekend to stroke his own ego. He was using my company money to do it. He had classified a personal family vacation as an executive team-building retreat. He even used the corporate account to pay $50 for this staff room, I noted, tapping the paper. He is literally stealing from his employer to insult us. Clara looked at the paper, her anger slowly morphing into a sharp, dangerous smile. "Are you going to tell him?" she asked, her eyes lighting up with the realization of what he had done. I shook my head, slipping the ledger into my jacket pocket as a perfect piece of physical evidence for my auditors. "Not yet," I said softly. "Let him enjoy the penthouse tonight. Let him drink the expensive champagne and pretend he is untouchable. The view from the top only makes the fall that much harder." Clara nodded slowly, her eyes locked on the folded piece of paper in my pocket. She understood the strategy, but her patience had a limit. "I will let him hang himself with his own corporate card," she said, picking up her duffel bag from the stained carpet. "But I am absolutely not sleeping in a utility closet while he does it. We are going back to the front desk. We can pay for our own room. If they do not have any left, we are driving home. I will not participate in this charade just to stroke his ego." I smiled and grabbed my own bag, following my wife back down the narrow bleach-scented hallway. When we emerged into the grand marble lobby, Desmond and Olivia were still there. They had been joined by two older men wearing expensive golf polos. From the way Desmond was aggressively networking and laughing too loudly, I instantly recognized them as regional vice presidents for OmniTech. Desmond was showing off, playing the role of the generous CEO, treating his family to a luxury weekend while mingling with his subordinates. Clara walked straight past the group and headed for the concierge desk, but Patricia spotted us. She excused herself from the group and intercepted Clara halfway across the lobby. Richard trailed right behind her, his face already set in a deep scowl. "Where do you think you are going with those bags?" Patricia hissed, keeping her voice low so the executives would not hear. "You just got here. You cannot drag your cheap luggage back and forth through the lobby. People are looking. We are leaving." "Mom," Clara said, her voice remarkably steady. "Or we are booking our own room if they have a cancellation." "That room Desmond put us in is a staff overflow closet next to a dumpster. I am not staying there. It is insulting." Richard stepped forward, blocking Clara's path to the reception desk. His face was turning a dangerous shade of red. "You are not going anywhere, and you are certainly not booking another room," he growled. "Do you have any idea how important this weekend is for Desmond? Those men over there are his key executives. He needs to project absolute control and family unity. If you storm out of here, or if you make a scene at the front desk trying to upgrade yourself, it will make him look weak. It will make him look like he cannot even manage his own family." Clara stared at her father in disbelief. "Manage his family?" She repeated, her voice rising just enough to make Richard flinch. "I am not his employee, Dad. I am your daughter. Why do you care more about his image in front of his coworkers than you care about how I am being treated?" "Because he is actually doing something with his life," Richard snapped, stepping even closer. "He is providing for your sister. He is elevating our entire family name. And what are you doing? You are married to a man who refuses to get a real job, and now you are throwing a childish tantrum over a hotel room because you are painfully jealous of your sister's success." I stepped up beside Clara, my presence alone causing Richard to tense up. "She is not jealous, Richard," I said calmly. "She simply expects basic human decency, something Desmond clearly lacks." Richard pointed a thick finger directly at my chest. "You keep your mouth shut, Nate. This is family business." Then he turned his furious gaze back to Clara. "Listen to me very carefully, Clara. I have spent my entire life building a legacy for this family. I have a sizable estate, and I am finalizing my will next month. If you turn around and walk out those doors, or if you do anything to embarrass Desmond in front of his colleagues this weekend, I will call my lawyer on Monday and cut you out entirely. You will not see a single dime of my money. I will leave everything to Olivia and Desmond." Clara physically recoiled as if she had been slapped. The threat was not just about money. It was about her father explicitly placing a price tag on her compliance and choosing his wealthy son-in-law over his own flesh and blood. Patricia stood next to him, offering no defense for her daughter. She simply crossed her arms and looked away, giving her silent approval to the ultimatum. I put my arm around Clara's waist, pulling her close. His threat meant absolutely nothing to our actual bank account, but the emotional betrayal was profound. Clara looked up at me. "We will stay," she whispered, her voice cold. "We will not embarrass your precious CEO." The next morning, the coastal sun beat down on the perfectly manicured greens of the Emerald Cove Championship course. Desmond had booked a premium early morning tea time for himself, Richard, and the two OmniTech regional vice presidents we had met in the lobby. He did not, however, book a spot for me to actually play. Instead, as the group gathered near the first tee box, stretching their arms and taking practice swings, Desmond casually kicked his massive custom leather golf bag in my direction. "Pick that up, Nate," he ordered, not even looking at me as he adjusted his expensive mirrored sunglasses. The caddies at this resort are notoriously slow, and since you do not have a real job or any corporate stress wearing you down, some heavy manual labor will be good for you. Richard chuckled heartily, patting Desmond on the back as if it was the most brilliant joke he had ever heard. The two vice presidents exchanged slightly uncomfortable glances, but quickly arranged their faces into polite smiles, too afraid of their new chief executive officer to say anything. I did not argue. I simply bent down, hoisted the heavy bag onto my shoulder, and followed them onto the green. For the first 8 holes, my role was strictly to hand Desmond his clubs, wipe down his irons with a towel, and listen to him brag loudly about his sweeping plans to dominate the tech industry. He spoke to the vice presidents with absolute arrogance, outlining aggressive budget cuts for the lower-level employees, while simultaneously boasting about the new corporate jet he planned to lease for his own personal travel. I carried his bag in silence, filing every single piece of information directly into my mental vault for the upcoming board meeting. As we approached the secluded 9th hole, a sleek black golf cart approached from the opposite direction. A man in a sharp polo shirt stepped out carrying a customized briefcase. I recognized him instantly from my deep dive into OmniTech's financial records. He was the regional director of a third-party server supplier, a company that had been desperately trying to secure a highly inflated vendor contract with OmniTech for the past 6 months. Desmond's face lit up with a predatory grin. He held up a hand, signaling the vice presidents and Richard to go ahead and start pudding. He then gestured for me to follow him toward a grove of trees near the edge of the fairway, completely out of earshot from the rest of the group. "Hold my driver, Nate," he snapped, tossing the golf club at my chest. "Stand over there and face the ocean. Do not listen to a word we say. This is high-level executive business way above your pay grade." I obediently stepped a few feet away, turning my back to them as instructed. But as I held his expensive driver, I smoothly slid my phone out of my pocket, opened the voice memo app, and hit record. I kept the phone casually pressed against the side of the golf bag. The microphone pointed directly at the two men. They were standing so close I could hear the supplier shifting his weight nervously on the grass. Desmond did not bother lowering his voice. He assumed I was just a financially illiterate, defeated man who would not understand corporate negotiations even if I tried. He assumed my presence was entirely irrelevant. It was the most catastrophic miscalculation of his entire life. "Look, let us skip the pleasantries," Desmond said smoothly, his voice dripping with greed. "I have the finalized vendor contract right here, $3 million to upgrade our regional servers. Now we both know those servers are only worth about $2 million. So here is how this works. I will sign this approval form today, guaranteeing your company the full $3 million payout from OmniTech. In exchange, you are going to route $500,000 of that excess budget into the offshore consulting LLC I set up last week. You get a massive contract and I get a signing bonus that my board of directors does not need to know about. Do we have a deal?" The supplier hesitated for only a second before I heard the distinct sound of a pen scratching across paper. "You are a ruthless businessman, Desmond." The supplier laughed nervously. "I am a man who knows what he is worth," Desmond replied smugly. I hit stop on the recording, saving the audio file straight to a secure encrypted cloud folder shared directly with the Aegis Holdings legal team. Desmond turned around entirely oblivious to the fact that he had just confessed to a major federal crime with the majority shareholder standing less than 5 feet away. He snatched his golf club out of my hand with a sneer. "Let us go, Nate," he barked. "Try to keep up." I smiled, shouldering the heavy bag once more. I would keep up all right. In fact, I was already leagues ahead. I smiled, shouldering the heavy bag once more. I would keep up all right. In fact, I was already leagues ahead. While I spent the rest of the morning hauling golf clubs and gathering enough federal evidence to put my brother-in-law away for a decade, my wife was fighting her own battles back at the main lodge. Clara had decided to escape the stifling heat of our staff closet by visiting the resort spa. Since our flimsy plastic keycard did not grant us access to any of the actual treatments, she was simply sitting in the free public lounge area, reading a book and sipping lemon water. The tranquility did not last long. The heavy glass doors of the VIP massage suite swung open, and Olivia strolled out, followed closely by Patricia. They were both wrapped in plush monogrammed robes, their skin glowing from whatever expensive facials Desmond had just charged to my company. Olivia spotted Clara immediately. Instead of ignoring her sister, Olivia marched straight over to the lounge chairs, a predatory smirk plastered across her face. She looked Clara up and down, her eyes lingering critically on Clara's simple cotton sundress and canvas sandals. "You know," Clara Olivia began, her voice echoing slightly in the quiet spa lounge. "Desmond was actually worried you might feel out of place at a resort like this. I told him not to worry, but looking at you now, I see his point. You look like you are here to clean the pool, not swim in it." Patricia chuckled softly, adjusting the collar of her robe. "Do not be mean, Olivia. Your sister is doing the best she can with what she has. It is not her fault Nate refuses to provide for her. But really, Clara, you could have at least worn something a little more presentable. We have an image to maintain here. Desmond is a highly visible executive now. We cannot have his extended family looking like charity cases in front of his colleagues." Clara calmly closed her book and set it on the small table next to her. She looked at her mother, feeling the familiar sting of rejection, but this time the sting was completely overshadowed by the secret knowledge she possessed. "I am perfectly comfortable in what I am wearing," Mom Clara said evenly. "I do not need a $5,000 dress to feel good about myself." Olivia let out a dramatic sigh and signaled for one of the spa attendants to bring her a fresh towel. "It is not about feeling good, Clara. It is about belonging in a certain tax bracket. A concept you clearly do not grasp." Olivia reached onto the lounge chair next to her and casually picked up her purse. It was a brand new limited edition designer bag, crafted from pristine white leather with heavy gold hardware. "Desmond bought this for me yesterday just because I said I liked the color. It cost more than your husband makes in 6 months. That is what a real provider looks like. He spoils me because he values me." Clara stared at the white leather bag. She remembered the printout I had shown her in our terrible little room. She remembered scanning the itemized list of charges that Desmond had preemptively run through the OmniTech corporate account to secure the penthouse. She remembered seeing a massive charge at the resort luxury boutique flagged as a corporate gift for a visiting client. "That is a beautiful bag, Olivia," Clara said, her voice dripping with an icy calm that made Patricia narrow her eyes in confusion. "It really is stunning. What was it exactly?" $4,850 after tax. Olivia blinked momentarily, thrown off guard by Clara's exact knowledge of the price tag. "Yes, actually," Olivia said, lifting her chin defensively. "Like I said, Desmond does not care about the price, he just swipes his card." "Oh, I know he just swipes his card," Clara smiled, leaning forward slightly. "But you might want to ask him exactly which card he is swiping, because I am pretty sure buying a nearly $5,000 purse on the OmniTech corporate credit card and classifying it as a client gift is considered corporate fraud." The color instantly drained from Olivia's face. Her grip on the white leather bag tightened so much her knuckles turned white. Patricia gasped, her hand flying to her chest. "What are you talking about?" Patricia demanded, her voice rising in panic. "How dare you accuse Desmond of something so horrible? You are just jealous." "I am not accusing him of anything," Clara replied, standing up and smoothing down her simple cotton dress. "I am just stating a fact. The corporate routing number is printed right on the resort's master ledger. He paid for your penthouse, your VIP spa treatments, and that bag using company funds meant for software development. So do not stand there and lecture me about how my husband cannot provide for me. At least the clothes on my back were bought with honest money, not stolen from an employer." Olivia opened her mouth to argue, to scream, to call Clara a liar, but no words came out. The absolute certainty in Clara's eyes paralyzed her. Olivia knew deep down that Desmond was reckless, and the sheer terror of being caught in a lie stripped away all her arrogance. "Enjoy the rest of your spa day," Clara said cheerfully, picking up her book. "Just make sure you do not get any massage oil on the corporate merchandise. The board of directors might want it back." Clara turned her back on her stunned sister and mother, walking out of the spa lounge with her head held high. She did not look back as she navigated the marble hallways, making her way straight back to the staff annex to find me. The war had officially escalated, and my wife had just fired a massive warning shot directly into their glass house. When Clara opened the door to our cramped staff room, I could see the adrenaline still pulsing through her veins. She dropped her book onto the bed and paced the narrow space between the mattress and the cinder block wall. She recounted every single word of her exchange with Olivia and Patricia in the spa lounge. She described the exact moment the smug superiority vanished from her sister's face, replaced by absolute panic when Clara mentioned the corporate routing number and the price of the white leather bag. I sat on the edge of the cheap mattress and listened quietly, feeling a profound sense of pride. Clara had always been the family peacemaker. She was the one who absorbed their insults to keep the peace, the one who tried to find the good in people who constantly treated her like garbage. Seeing her finally draw a hard line in the sand and push back was incredible. She was done playing the victim. "That was a brilliant move," I told her, smiling as she finally sat down next to me. You let them know that we are not as blind as they think we are. But while you were delivering that warning shot, I was out on the golf course gathering the heavy artillery. I pulled my phone from my pocket and opened the secure encrypted cloud folder. I set the phone on the small laminate desk in the corner of the room, turned the volume all the way up, and hit play. The tiny room filled with the sound of the coastal wind, followed by the unmistakable arrogant voice of her brother-in-law. Clara listened in absolute silence as the recording played. She heard Desmond brazenly negotiate the inflated $3 million server contract. She heard him explicitly demand a $500,000 kickback to be routed into his newly formed offshore consulting firm. She heard the supplier nervously agree to the terms, sealing the corrupt deal right there on the ninth hole. When the recording ended, Clara stared at the phone in pure disbelief. She had always known Desmond was a narcissist who loved to show off his wealth. She knew he was financially reckless and ethically questionable. But federal extortion, wire fraud, and embezzlement were entirely different levels of criminality. He was not just an arrogant jerk playing at being a high roller. He was a corporate criminal actively robbing the company that had just hired him. "He is going to prison," Clara whispered, the reality of the situation finally sinking in. "If the board of directors hears this, they will have him arrested." "They are going to hear it," I assured her. "But we need to make sure the trap is perfectly set before we spring it. We need to lock down all the financial records before he realizes he is being watched and tries to destroy the evidence." I picked up my phone and dialed a private, unlisted number. It bypassed all standard corporate receptionists and rang directly in the secure office of David, the lead forensic accountant and head of internal security at Aegis Holdings. David was a former federal investigator who handled all of my high-level corporate acquisitions. He answered on the first ring. "Good afternoon, sir," David said, his tone crisp and professional. "David, I have a situation at OmniTech," I said, keeping my voice low and authoritative. "I need you to initiate a silent, comprehensive forensic audit on the new Chief Executive Officer, Desmond. Pull every single expense report, every vendor contract, and every corporate credit card statement linked to him since his date of hire. I also just uploaded an audio file to the secure server. I need you to trace an offshore consulting LLC mentioned in that recording and link it directly to his personal banking accounts." "Consider it done," David replied without hesitation. "Do you want me to freeze his corporate access right now?" "Absolutely not," I instructed. "He cannot know he is being audited. Let him keep his access. Let him keep spending. I want him feeling completely invincible so he continues to make sloppy mistakes. Just quietly gather every piece of paper and digital footprint he leaves behind. I want an airtight case ready by the end of the week." "Understood," David said. "I will have the full dossier prepared for you well before the OmniTech shareholder gala next Friday. Will you be attending the event?" I smiled, looking over at Clara, who was watching me with a mixture of shock and awe. "Yes, David," I replied smoothly. "My wife and I will definitely be in attendance. Make sure the security team is on standby." I ended the call and tossed the phone back onto the desk. The weekend trip was supposed to be a brutal punishment for us. It was supposed to be a prolonged exercise in humiliation to prove that Desmond held all the power. Instead, he had just handed me the exact weapon I needed to destroy his entire life. The countdown to the gala had officially begun. The countdown to the gala had officially begun. By Wednesday evening, that countdown felt like a ticking time bomb sitting right in the middle of Richard and Patricia's formal dining room. Desmond had called an urgent family meeting demanding that everyone attend for what he described as a once-in-a-lifetime wealth-building seminar. Clara and I sat quietly at the far end of the long mahogany table, watching the performance unfold. Desmond stood at the head of the table, wearing a crisp, tailored dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up to project an image of a hardworking executive. But underneath the expensive cologne, I could see the faint sheen of sweat on his forehead. His eyes darted nervously around the room. David and the internal security team at Aegis Holdings had been working with ruthless efficiency. While they had not locked Desmond out of the system, They had quietly flagged his offshore accounts and initiated a series of automated compliance blocks on large external wire transfers. Desmond was suddenly finding it very difficult to move the money he was stealing. He was scrambling to cover his tracks, and he needed clean, untraceable domestic cash immediately. "Listen to me, Richard," Desmond said, his voice dropping into a low, conspiratorial whisper. He leaned across the table, placing his hands flat on the polished wood. "OmniTech is secretly developing a proprietary artificial intelligence server grid. We are calling it Project Apex. It is completely off the books right now, strictly confidential. The board of directors has authorized a private internal funding round before we announce it to the public, and the stock explodes." Richard leaned forward, his eyes wide with greed. He had always wanted to be an insider, a man of importance. Patricia sat next to him, practically vibrating with excitement. "Because I am the chief executive officer," Desmond continued smoothly, "I was able to negotiate a rare family and friends loophole. I can secure you a block of pre-IPO equity. It is a guaranteed investment, Richard. I am talking about a 300% return within 6 months. I control the project, so there is zero risk. You hand me the capital, I route it through the executive portal, and you become millionaires by Christmas." "That sounds incredible, Desmond," Patricia gasped, clasping her hands together. "How much do we need to invest to get in on this?" Desmond stood up straight, adjusting his expensive watch. "The minimum buy-in is $300,000, he said casually, as if he were asking for pocket change. "I know you do not have that kind of liquid cash sitting in a checking account, but you have something better. You have a fully paid-off house in one of the best neighborhoods in the city." Richard blinked the massive number, giving him a brief moment of pause. "You want me to mortgage the house?" he asked, his voice wavering slightly. "I want you to leverage your dead assets to build generational wealth," Desmond corrected, using textbook predatory salesman tactics. "It is just a temporary transfer of funds. You take out a home equity line of credit, hand the capital to me for Project Apex, and in 6 months you pay off the loan and keep the massive profits." "Olivia and I have already put in $500,000 of our own money." Olivia nodded enthusiastically, completely oblivious to the fact that her husband was lying through his teeth. "It is true, Dad. Desmond is practically handing you a winning lottery ticket. You cannot let this slip by. Imagine the looks on your friends' faces at the country club when you tell them you are an early-stage tech investor." I watched Desmond carefully. He was playing them perfectly. He knew exactly which buttons to push to override their common sense. He was going to take their $300,000 and use it to plug the gaping hole he had created in the OmniTech budget, desperately hoping to hide his embezzlement before the auditors caught up with him. He was willing to leave his own in-laws homeless to save his own skin. Richard looked at Patricia. They shared a look of pure, unadulterated greed. They did not ask to see any paperwork. They did not ask to consult a financial advisor. They simply trusted the man wearing the expensive suit and the shiny title. "All right," Richard said, slamming his hand down on the table with a decisive thud. "I will call the bank manager first thing tomorrow morning. We can fast-track the home equity loan. We are in Desmond. We are going to be tech investors." Desmond let out a long, shaky breath, the relief washing over his face so clearly that it was almost comical. Clara shifted uncomfortably next to me under the table. She hated the way her parents treated us, but watching them willingly sign away their family home to a desperate con artist was a difficult pill to swallow. I placed my hand gently over hers, keeping my face perfectly neutral. The trap was getting tighter, and the collateral damage was entirely of their own making. I placed my hand gently over hers, keeping my face perfectly neutral. The trap was getting tighter, and the collateral damage was entirely of their own making. But as Richard reached into his jacket pocket to pull out a silver pen, something in me snapped. I was ruthless in business, but allowing a man to unknowingly sign away the roof over his head to feed a criminal felt like a line I should at least attempt to stop him from crossing. I leaned forward, my voice cutting through the celebratory chatter. "Richard, wait," I said firmly. Do not sign anything right now." The room instantly went dead silent. Desmond froze his eyes, snapping toward me with a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. He knew he was incredibly close to securing his lifeline, and he viewed me as a threat even if he still believed I was just a broke freelancer. Richard paused, his pen hovering just an inch above the crisp white document Desmond had placed in front of him. "Excuse me," Richard asked, his brow furrowing in irritation. "Did you just tell me what to do with my own money?" "I am advising you to pause and think this through," I replied evenly, keeping my eyes locked on Richard. "Project Apex is not public knowledge. You have not seen a prospectus, a risk disclosure, or any actual financial projections. You are relying entirely on verbal promises. If this project fails, or if it is not exactly what Desmond claims it is, the bank will foreclose on your home. You and Patricia will have nowhere to live. You cannot leverage your primary residence for a high-risk tech venture you know nothing about." Desmond let out a sharp, mocking laugh, quickly trying to regain control of the room. "A high-risk tech venture," he repeated, shaking his head, as if I had just said something incredibly stupid. "Nate, this is OmniTech. This is a billion-dollar global corporation. The only risk here is missing out because a guy who trades penny stocks from his couch is suddenly trying to play financial advisor. You do not understand executive-level investments because you have never been an executive. You are projecting your own financial insecurities onto Richard." Olivia chimed in immediately, her voice shrill and defensive. "He is just jealous, Dad. He is furious because Desmond is offering you an opportunity to become wealthy, and Nate knows he will never be able to provide anything like this for Clara. He wants you to stay exactly where you are so he does not feel so inadequate." Patricia nodded vigorously, glaring at me across the table. "Olivia is absolutely right. Nate, it is incredibly rude of you to come into our home and try to sabotage Desmond's generous offer. We finally have a chance to secure our retirement and build a real legacy, and you are trying to ruin it just because you cannot participate." I looked at Richard. I was giving him one final chance to use his own brain before the impending disaster. "Richard, I am telling you, as someone who understands how these corporate structures work, this is a terrible idea. Do not put a lien on your house. If Desmond is so confident in this project, let him fund it entirely with his own capital." I reached out across the table, intending to tap the document to emphasize my point. But before my finger could even brush the paper, Richard exploded. He violently slapped my hand away, the sound echoing sharply in the quiet dining room. "Do not touch my papers!" Richard bellowed, his face turning crimson with rage. "Who do you think you are, Nate? You sit in my house eating my food, and you have the absolute audacity to lecture me about finance. You are a 34-year-old failure. You drive a rusted piece of junk. You cannot even afford to take my daughter on a decent vacation without Desmond bailing you out. You are nothing but a jealous, bitter man who cannot stand to see another man succeed where you have failed." Clara gasped, jumping slightly in her seat. "Dad, stop it!" she cried out. "You cannot speak to him like that." "I will speak to him however I want in my own house," Richard roared back, pointing a shaking finger at Clara. "And if you are going to sit there and defend this loser while he tries to ruin your family's financial future, then you can both leave. Right now. I am done listening to his pathetic whining." Richard snatched the silver pen from the table and aggressively signed his name on the dotted line, pressing so hard the tip almost tore through the paper. He shoved the signed document across the table to Desmond. "Here," he said, his chest heaving. "Get it done, Desmond. Make us millionaires, and ignore the dead weight." Desmond smiled, a slow, triumphant smirk that made my skin crawl. He carefully folded the document and slid it into his custom leather briefcase. "Do not worry, Richard," Desmond said smoothly, shooting me a victorious glance. "I always deliver on my promises. The money will be routed to the project account by Friday morning." I slowly stood up, my face completely devoid of emotion. I had tried. I had genuinely tried to save them from themselves. But they had made their choice. They had chosen the illusion of wealth over the reality of their own destruction. "Let us go, Clara," I said quietly. We walked out of the house without another word. As I started the engine of my old Ford, I pulled out my phone. I sent a quick message to David at Aegis Holdings. It read, "Monitor all incoming wire transfers to Desmond's accounts. A large sum is coming in from Richard. Freeze it the second it hits the OmniTech servers. Do not let Desmond touch a single dime." The CEO was about to find out that his guaranteed investment was a one-way ticket to federal prison. The CEO was about to find out that his guaranteed investment was a one-way ticket to federal prison. But before the trap could fully snap shut on him, Desmond decided he needed to teach me a brutal lesson for daring to humiliate him at the dinner table. If he could not break my pride directly, he would go after the person I loved most. Desmond was a man who thrived on absolute control. He could not stand the fact that Clara and I had walked out of Richard's house with our heads held high, refusing to bow to his fabricated authority. The next morning, Thursday, I was sitting at my kitchen island with my laptop open. I was drinking my coffee and reviewing the first batch of preliminary audit files that David had pushed to my secure server overnight. The sheer volume of Desmond's financial crimes was breathtaking. He had only been chief executive officer for a few weeks, but he was already bleeding OmniTech dry. However, David's surveillance was not limited to just bank statements. As part of the comprehensive internal security protocol, I had authorized David was also monitoring Desmond's corporate communications and executive phone logs. Just before 9 o'clock, David sent me a priority encrypted message. It contained the transcript of a phone call Desmond had just made from his corner office. I read the transcript, my blood running cold. Desmond had called the managing partner of Horizon Creative. Horizon was a mid-sized advertising agency downtown, and they also happened to be the firm where Clara worked as a senior marketing coordinator. Because my in-laws never cared to ask about our professional lives, Desmond likely thought it was just a happy coincidence that his new company happened to be Horizon's largest corporate client. He saw a weapon, and he immediately picked it up. According to the transcript, Desmond did not even bother to be subtle. He told the managing partner of Horizon Creative that OmniTech was doing a comprehensive review of all external vendor contracts. He explicitly stated that he was unhappy with the current marketing direction and was strongly considering pulling their multi-million-dollar advertising account. The managing partner panicked, desperately asking what they could do to salvage the relationship. Desmond then smoothly dropped Clara's name. He falsely claimed that Clara was highly unprofessional, that she had insulted the OmniTech leadership team at a private networking event, and that her continued employment at Horizon was a direct conflict of interest. He demanded she be terminated immediately, or OmniTech would take their business to a rival agency by the end of the day. It was a textbook case of corporate extortion and a blatant violation of employment law. Desmond was weaponizing his position to ruin my wife's career simply because I told her father not to sign a bad loan. While I was reading the transcript, Clara was sitting at her desk downtown, completely unaware of the storm about to hit her. She loved her job at Horizon. She had spent 4 years building her reputation there, managing successful campaigns and mentoring junior staff. She had just finished a morning presentation when she got an unexpected ping on her calendar. Human Resources requested her presence in the main conference room immediately. When Clara walked into the room, she found her direct supervisor and the head of Human Resources waiting for her. The atmosphere was incredibly tense. Her supervisor, a woman Clara had considered a mentor, could not even make eye contact. The Human Resources director pushed a manila folder across the polished table. It was a standard termination agreement and a meager severance package. Clara was completely blindsided. She asked what was wrong, citing her recent performance reviews, which had been overwhelmingly positive. The Human Resources director stammered, offering a vague, legally approved script about corporate restructuring and shifting client demands. But Clara was smart. She noticed the way her supervisor looked like she was about to be sick. She pushed for the real reason. Finally, her supervisor broke down and admitted that an absolute mandate had come down from the executive level. A major client had threatened to pull their entire account unless Clara was let go. They could not risk the agency's survival for one employee. Clara did not need to ask which client it was. She knew instantly. Desmond had reached his greedy hands into her professional life and crushed it just to spite me. She refused to sign the severance agreement. She quietly packed up her desk under the sympathetic but cowardly gaze of her coworkers. She carried her cardboard box out of the glass building, stepping out into the busy city streets, her entire career violently ripped away by a man who thought he was invincible. She carried her cardboard box out of the glass building, stepping out into the busy city streets, her entire career violently ripped away by a man who thought he was invincible. When the front door of our rental house opened hours earlier than usual, I knew exactly what was happening. I stood up from the kitchen island, closing my laptop just as Clara walked into the entryway. She was holding a brown cardboard box tightly against her chest, her knuckles white. Her face was pale and her eyes were red and swollen. She did not say a word. She just walked into the living room, dropped the box onto the coffee table with a heavy thud, and handed me a single sheet of paper. It was the termination letter. The official company seal of Horizon Creative was stamped at the top, followed by cold, sterile legal jargon explaining that her position had been eliminated effective immediately. I pulled her into my arms, holding her tightly as she finally broke down. She sobbed against my shoulder, releasing the kind of deep, gut-wrenching cries that come from pure injustice. I stroked her hair, letting her let out the shock and the anger. Internally, my blood was boiling. I had read the transcript. I knew exactly what Desmond had done, but reading his words on a screen was completely different from feeling my wife shake in my arms because of them. "He took it, Nate." Clara cried, her voice muffled against my shirt. 4 years of late nights, skipped lunches, and building client relationships from scratch, all gone in a 10-minute meeting. My supervisor could not even look me in the eye. They told me a major client threatened to pull their entire account unless I was fired. They said I was a conflict of interest and a liability to the agency. "I know," I whispered, kissing the top of her head. "I know it was him." Clara pulled back slightly, wiping her eyes with the back of her sleeve. She looked up at me, her expression hardening into a fierce scowl. "He did this just to punish you. He could not handle the fact that you stood up to my father last night and exposed his little project for the scam it is, so he used his title to destroy the only thing I had that was completely mine. He wants us to be desperate. He wants us to come crawling back to him for help so he can laugh in our faces." I looked down at the cardboard box on the table. I saw her framed Employee of the Month award sitting sadly on top of some notebooks and pens. Desmond had crossed a massive line. Up until this point, my plan had been strictly professional. I was going to let the Aegis Holdings audit team gather the evidence, present it to the board, and let the authorities handle his embezzlement quietly. I was going to fire him and let the legal system run its course. But seeing my wife cry changed everything. He did not just steal from my company. He actively tried to destroy my family. The gloves were officially off. I was no longer interested in a quiet corporate firing. I wanted a public execution. I wanted to tear down his empire in front of everyone he had ever tried to impress. "Look at me, Clara," I said gently, cupping her face in my hands. "You are going to be okay. This is not the end of your career. It is barely a speed bump." "How can you say that?" she asked, her voice cracking. "I was fired for a fabricated ethical violation. Desmond is the chief executive officer of their biggest client. If I try to apply anywhere else in the city, he will just make another phone call and ruin that too. He has all the power right now. He has absolutely nothing." I corrected her, my voice turning to ice. "He has a rented suit, a leased sports car, and a stolen credit card. That is the extent of his power. He is a pathetic, insecure little man playing dress-up in a company he does not understand. And by Friday night, the entire world is going to see exactly who he is." Clara sniffled, looking at me with a mixture of confusion and hope. "Friday night," she echoed. "You mean the OmniTech shareholder gala?" My parents and Olivia have been bragging about it all week. They bought new outfits. They think they are going to be introduced as VIP guests. They will be VIP guests. I smiled coldly. They will have a front row seat to the greatest show in town. Desmond wanted a war, and he thought he could win by attacking you. But he forgot one very important detail. What is that? Clara asked softly. He forgot that he works for me, I replied. Now go wash your face and pick out the best dress you own. We have a party to attend. He forgot that he works for me, I replied. Now go wash your face and pick out the best dress you own. We have a party to attend. Before Clara could process my words, a loud and aggressive knock echoed through our small living room. Someone was pounding on the front door as if they owned the property. I gave Clara a reassuring squeeze on the shoulder, turned around, and walked over to pull the door open. Standing on my porch, bathed in the dim yellow glow of the porch light, were Desmond and Olivia. Desmond was wearing a tailored navy suit, looking completely out of place on our cracked concrete walkway. In his right hand, he held a greasy, translucent plastic bag filled with cheap takeout containers from a local fast food chain. Olivia stood beside him, clutching the very same white leather bag she had bought with my company funds, her nose slightly wrinkled as she surveyed our modest neighborhood with undisguised disgust. Well, do not just stand there, Desmond said, pushing past me into the house without waiting for an invitation. Olivia followed right on his heels, stepping carefully as if the floorboards might infect her expensive shoes. Desmond walked straight into the living room and carelessly dropped the greasy bag of food onto the coffee table. It landed directly next to the cardboard box holding Clara's framed Employee of the Month award and office supplies. Heard the bad news, Desmond said, a wicked and triumphant gleam in his dark eyes. He looked down at the cardboard box and let out a dramatic sigh. Word travels incredibly fast in the corporate world, Clara. I was on a conference call with some industry leaders this afternoon, and someone mentioned that Horizon Creative was doing some unexpected downsizing. It is a tough market out there for mid-level employees. I told Olivia we should swing by and bring you guys some dinner. Since you just lost your only reliable source of income, we figured money is going to be incredibly tight for you two. Clara stared at him, her chest heaving. She knew exactly what he had done, and standing in our living room listening to him pretend to be a benevolent savior was almost too much to bear. She took a step forward, her hands balled into tight fists, but I smoothly stepped in front of her, blocking her path. I needed Desmond to keep talking. I needed him to dig the hole so deep there would be absolutely no climbing out. That is very charitable of you, Desmond, I said, keeping my voice dangerously calm. I looked at the cheap plastic containers leaking grease onto our table. You really spared no expense to comfort us. Olivia let out a sharp and condescending laugh. You should be down on your knees thanking us, Nate. After the way you disrespected my father at dinner last night, and the horrific way Clara spoke to me at the resort spa, most people would cut you off completely. We should have let you starve. But Desmond has a huge heart. He is willing to look past your massive failures and offer a peace treaty. Desmond adjusted his expensive silk tie and took a step closer to me, trying to use his height to intimidate me. He puffed out his chest, radiating the false confidence of a man who thought he held all the cards. I am a very powerful man in this city, Nate. Desmond growled, dropping the fake sympathy entirely. His voice was low and dripping with malice. I know other chief executives. I sit on exclusive boards. I know exactly how to ruin a professional reputation with a single 5-minute phone call. Your wife just learned that lesson the hard way. When you mess with my family, there are severe consequences. He pointed a manicured finger directly at my face. So here's the deal. You are going to look my wife in the eyes right now and apologize for your pathetic behavior. You are going to apologize for trying to ruin my investment pitch to Richard, and Clara is going to apologize for her ridiculous jealousy fit at the spa. If you do not beg for our forgiveness right now, I promise you neither of you will ever find decent employment in this state again. I will personally make sure every hiring manager in the tech and marketing sectors throws your resumes directly into the trash. I will crush you both until you are living on the street. The room went completely silent. Olivia stood behind him with a smug and self-satisfied smile plastered across her face. They were waiting for me to break. They were waiting for me to lower my head, admit defeat, and beg for the mercy of the great OmniTech CEO. I looked at the greasy food on the table. I looked at the stolen white leather purse hanging on Olivia's arm. Then I looked directly into Desmond's eyes and let out a soft and genuine laugh. "I appreciate the delivery, Desmond," I said smoothly, stepping back to open the front door wide. "But we do not owe you an apology. And as for my employment, I think my position is incredibly secure. Now I suggest you leave. You have a very big night tomorrow at the gala, and you are going to need all your strength to survive it." Desmond scowled, clearly furious that his grand threat had not caused me to crumble. He shook his head in disgust and marched toward the door. "You really are delusional, Nate," he spat. "Enjoy the cheap food. It is the best you are going to eat for a very long time." I closed the front door quietly until the latch clicked into place, completely unfazed by his parting insult. I walked over to the front window and pulled back the curtain just enough to watch Desmond and Olivia march down the walkway. They climbed into their leased silver Porsche, the engine roaring to life with an aggressive rev, before they sped off down our quiet residential street. They thought they had just delivered a fatal blow. They thought they had secured their dominance and forced us into permanent submission. I turned back to the living room. Clara was still standing near the coffee table, her eyes fixed on the greasy plastic bag of takeout food Desmond had left behind as a mocking gesture of charity. She was trembling, but it was not from fear or defeat. It was from pure, unadulterated anger. I walked over, picked up the plastic bag, and dropped it directly into the kitchen trash can. The heavy thud of the food hitting the bottom of the bin felt incredibly satisfying. I walked back to Clara and gently took her hands in mine. Her skin was cold, but her posture was rigid and defiant. "Are you ready for this?" I asked her softly, "because once I set this in motion, there is no going back. We are going to burn his entire fabricated empire to the ground, and your parents are going to be caught in the crossfire." Clara looked up at me, her eyes filled with a fierce determination I had never seen before. "Do it," she said, her voice steady and resolute. "He took my job. He tried to take my dignity. And my parents stood by and cheered him on while he did it. I am done protecting people who would gladly throw me to the wolves just to feel important. Tear it all down, Nate." I smiled, feeling a surge of absolute pride for the woman standing in front of me. I let go of her hands and reached into my pocket, pulling out my phone. I opened my encrypted messaging app and scrolled down to the secure thread with my executive assistant at Aegis Holdings. The board had been waiting for my final green light to proceed with the annual OmniTech shareholder gala. The event was already planned, the venue was booked, but the official invitations identifying the new majority owner had been held back at my request. I typed a single word into the message box: execute. I hit send and locked my phone, tossing it onto the kitchen counter. Within seconds, I knew exactly what was happening in a high-rise office building downtown. My assistant was hitting a master command that dispatched hundreds of heavily embossed digital and physical invitations to the most powerful tech investors, board members, and executives in the city. The guest list was meticulously curated. It included the media, federal regulators, and the entire senior leadership team of OmniTech. But more importantly, the system was dispatching VIP access passes to Desmond, Olivia, Richard, and Patricia. Desmond would receive his invitation under the assumption that he was the guest of honor, the brilliant new chief executive officer ready to be crowned before the entire industry. My in-laws would receive their passes thinking they were royalty by association. "Tomorrow night is going to be very formal," I told Clara, wrapping my arms around her waist. "The Waldorf Astoria Grand Ballroom. We are going to need to do some shopping tomorrow morning. I want you wearing a dress that makes Olivia realize just how cheap her stolen accessories really are." Clara let out a wet laugh, resting her head against my chest. "I think I can manage that," she whispered. By the time we woke up the next morning, the invitations had officially landed. While we were drinking our morning coffee, Clara's phone buzzed with a frantic string of text messages from her mother. Patricia was practically vibrating with excitement through the screen. She sent photos of a ridiculous sequined gown she had just rushed out to buy, bragging that Desmond had secured them front-row VIP tables at the biggest corporate event of the decade. She even had the audacity to ask if Clara had found a new job yet, following it up immediately, with a reminder that Desmond was going to be giving the keynote speech, and how proud the family was of him. Clara read the messages aloud, shaking her head in disbelief. "They really have no idea," she said, tossing her phone onto the kitchen island. "They are walking straight into a slaughterhouse, and they bought new outfits for the occasion." I took a sip of my coffee, feeling a cold, calculating calm settle over me. My phone buzzed next to hers. It was a message from David, my head of internal security. The financial audit was complete, the offshore accounts were frozen, and the FBI liaison was confirmed for the evening. "The trap is perfectly set," I told my wife, setting my mug down. "Let us go get ready for the gala." "The trap is perfectly set," I told my wife, setting my mug down. "Let us go get ready for the gala." Hours later, the streets of the city were buzzing with a frenetic electric energy. The historic Waldorf Astoria Hotel had been completely transformed into a fortress of corporate wealth and power. Brilliant white searchlights pierced the night sky, sweeping across the ornate stone facade of the grand building. A massive red carpet stretched from the polished brass doors all the way down the marble steps to the street, flanked on both sides by heavy velvet ropes and a small army of stoic security personnel wearing earpieces. Behind those barricades stood a dense crowd of local business reporters, industry bloggers, and photographers. The recent acquisition of OmniTech by the notoriously private equity firm Aegis Holdings had the entire financial sector buzzing with curiosity. Tonight was supposed to be the grand reveal of the company's new direction, and the media was desperate for a story. At exactly 8 o'clock, a massive, ostentatious white stretch limousine pulled up to the curb, effectively blocking the flow of traffic on the busy avenue. It was the kind of flashy rented vehicle usually reserved for high school proms or bachelor parties. It looked entirely out of place among the sleek, understated black town cars and private luxury sedans that had been dropping off the actual billionaires and industry titans all evening. But Desmond did not care about quiet luxury or subtlety. He only cared about being seen by as many people as possible. The uniformed chauffeur hurried around to open the rear passenger door, and Desmond stepped out onto the red carpet. He wore a custom-tailored midnight blue tuxedo that fit his broad shoulders flawlessly, his posture rigid with manufactured authority. He paused for a long moment, deliberately adjusting his heavy cuffs to ensure the photographers caught the gleam of his expensive gold watch under the bright lights. A wave of murmuring rippled through the press corps, followed by a sudden barrage of camera flashes. They recognized him from the recent corporate press releases. This was the man who had just been handed the keys to a billion-dollar tech empire. Desmond turned back to the open door of the limousine and offered his hand. Out stepped Olivia, looking like a walking caricature of a wealthy socialite. She wore a tight, glittering emerald gown that pooled heavily on the red carpet. Tucked tightly under her arm was the infamous white leather designer bag she had purchased using my company funds. She linked her arm through Desmond's, lifting her chin and offering the cameras a practiced, haughty smile. She looked at the reporters behind the velvet ropes with a mixture of amusement and absolute disdain, playing the role of the untouchable executive wife to perfection. Right behind them emerged my in-laws. Patricia was practically suffocating in the tight sequined gown she had excitedly texted us about that morning. Her eyes were wide with sheer disbelief as she took in the flashing cameras, the shouting reporters, and the sheer scale of the event. She waved awkwardly at a photographer who was not even looking at her, completely intoxicated by the spectacle. Richard stepped out last, puffing out his chest and buttoning his tuxedo jacket. He nodded firmly to the security guards by the door, as if he personally paid their salaries, radiating the smug satisfaction of a man who believed he had finally secured his place among the elite. The four of them walked down the red carpet as a united front of unearned arrogance. Desmond walked slowly, milking every single second of the attention. Near the grand entrance doors, he willingly took the bait from a local finance reporter who thrust a microphone over the velvet rope. "Mr. Chief Executive," the reporter called out loudly, "do you have any words on the future of OmniTech under your new leadership?" Desmond stopped flashing a slick, predatory grin for the cameras. The future is aggressive growth, he declared, making sure his booming voice carried over the crowd. We are trimming the fat. We are eliminating the dead weight that has been holding this company back, and we are making bold, visionary investments. Tonight is just the beginning of a new era. OmniTech is going to completely dominate the tech market, and I am the man holding the wheel. Richard clapped Desmond heavily on the shoulder, beaming with profound pride. Olivia leaned into her husband, her diamond earrings sparkling in the light. They were completely blinded by the flashing cameras and their own delusions of absolute power. They walked through the brass doors of the hotel, truly believing they owned the world. They had absolutely no idea they were walking straight to their own public execution. They had absolutely no idea they were walking straight to their own public execution. Exactly 15 minutes after the rented white limousine pulled away from the curb, a sleek, jet-black Maybach glided silently up to the edge of the red carpet. There was no revving engine and no flashy entrance. My personal driver stepped out and opened the rear door. I stepped onto the pavement wearing a bespoke charcoal suit that carried no visible labels but fit with microscopic precision. I turned and offered my hand to Clara. When she stepped out into the flashing lights, she took my breath away. She was wearing a floor-length silk gown in a deep sapphire blue. It was elegant, timeless, and completely effortlessly beautiful. She wore a simple diamond necklace that rested perfectly against her collarbone. Compared to Olivia's loud, glittering emerald dress, Clara looked like true royalty. She radiated a quiet, unshakable confidence that money simply could not buy. The photographers snapped pictures out of habit, but they did not shout my name. I had spent my entire career ensuring my face stayed off the internet and out of the financial magazines. To the media, we were just another wealthy couple attending a corporate event. We walked past the velvet ropes quietly, our footsteps muffled by the thick red carpet, and entered the grand lobby of the hotel. The interior of the Waldorf Astoria was stunning. Towering floral arrangements of white orchids sat on marble pedestals, and servers in crisp white uniforms carried silver trays of champagne through the crowd of executives. In the very center of the lobby, standing near the entrance to the main ballroom, was Desmond. He had a glass of champagne in one hand and was loudly telling a story to a group of uncomfortable-looking OmniTech board members. He was completely in his element, holding court and demanding attention from everyone in his orbit. Olivia was standing next to him, scanning the room to see who was admiring her. Her eyes swept over the crowd and abruptly locked onto Clara. The smug smile instantly vanished from Olivia's face, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated shock. She nudged Desmond sharply in the ribs, spilling a few drops of his champagne onto his custom tuxedo. Desmond spun around, ready to snap at his wife, but then his eyes followed her gaze. When he saw me standing there with Clara holding my arm, his jaw actually dropped. His face turned a dangerous shade of red, the veins bulging in his neck. He quickly excused himself from the board members and marched directly toward us, closing the distance with heavy, angry strides. Olivia and my in-laws followed right behind him, looking like a pack of rabid dogs ready to defend their territory. "What the hell are you doing here?" Desmond hissed, keeping his voice just low enough to avoid drawing immediate attention from his bosses. "How did you even get past the front door? This is a private, multi-million-dollar corporate event, not a soup kitchen." "Good evening to you too, Desmond," I said smoothly, completely ignoring his hostility. "It is a beautiful venue you chose for tonight." Patricia stepped forward. Her face scrunched up in disgust as she looked at her own daughter. "Clara, what is wrong with you?" she whispered harshly. "Are you out of your mind? Desmond just fired you yesterday, and now you show up here to embarrass him in front of his entire company. Have you no shame at all? You need to leave right now before you ruin the biggest night of his life." Richard glared at me, his fists clenched at his sides. "I cannot believe the audacity of you two," Richard muttered. "I told you both to get out of my house, and now you follow us here to try and steal Desmond's spotlight. You are a parasite, Nate. And Clara, I am entirely ashamed to call you my daughter tonight. You should have stayed in that cheap rental house where you belong." Clara did not even flinch. She just looked at her father with a quiet, profound pity. "You will understand why we are here very soon, Dad," she said softly. "Invited?" Desmond barked out a harsh laugh, looking at us like we were completely insane. "Who invited you?" "The catering staff. Listen to me very carefully, Nate. I told you last night that I would ruin you if you did not apologize. Coming here and trying to crash my gala to beg for your wife's job back is the most pathetic thing I have ever seen. But I am not giving you a second chance. I am going to make an example out of you." Desmond turned his head and aggressively snapped his fingers at a pair of massive hotel security guards standing near the ballroom entrance. "Hey, you two get over here right now," Desmond commanded, acting like the supreme commander of the building. The two guards exchanged a look, but quickly walked over to our group, their expressions serious and alert. "These two individuals are trespassing," Desmond told the guards, pointing a rigid finger directly at my chest. "They are not on the guest list. I am the Chief Executive Officer of OmniTech, the company hosting this entire event. I want them escorted off the premises immediately, and if they resist, I want you to call the police and have them arrested for trespassing." The two massive hotel security guards took a step closer to us, their hands resting cautiously on their heavy utility belts. They were seasoned professionals trained to handle unruly guests quickly and quietly, to avoid disturbing the elite clientele. But before they could even ask us to step toward the exit doors, Patricia decided that a simple physical removal was not nearly enough. She wanted absolute psychological destruction. She saw the massive crowd of wealthy executives, investors, and reporters pausing to watch the commotion, and she immediately seized the opportunity to distance herself from us completely. "Do not just stand there and look at us like we are the ones ruining the night," Patricia practically screamed, her shrill voice echoing off the high marble ceilings of the Waldorf Astoria lobby. The gentle hum of polite corporate conversation instantly died. Dozens of heads turned in our direction. Waiters carrying silver trays of expensive champagne froze in their tracks. The executives Desmond had been trying to impress just moments ago were now staring openly at the unfolding drama. Patricia stepped around Desmond, pointing an accusing finger right at Clara's face. "You have always been a massive disappointment to this family, Clara," she announced loudly, ensuring every single person in the vicinity could hear her clearly. "But this is a new low even for you. You were just fired from your little marketing job yesterday because you are an unprofessional liability to your agency. You do not have a single penny to your name. You live in a disgusting rental house, your husband drives a rusted junk car, and now you show up here in a fake designer dress, trying to pretend you belong in the same room as highly successful people." Clara stood perfectly still. Her posture remained flawless, but I could feel the slight tremor in her arm where she was holding onto mine. Being berated by your own mother is painful enough in private. Having your mother broadcast your supposed failures to a room full of billionaires and industry titans is an entirely different level of unspeakable cruelty. Patricia was not finished. She paced back and forth, playing to the crowd like a twisted theater actor craving applause. "She is so incredibly jealous of her sister," Patricia told the onlookers, gesturing wildly toward Olivia. "Olivia married a man with actual ambition. Desmond is the chief executive officer of this entire company. He practically runs the tech industry in this city. He tried to help them. He offered them cash. He offered them a free luxury vacation. And how do they repay his incredible generosity? By trying to crash his corporate gala to beg for handouts because they are completely broke." A low murmur ran through the dressed-up crowd. Some of the attendees looked at us with genuine pity. Others looked at us with sheer disgust, completely buying into the pathetic narrative Patricia was loudly spinning. Richard nodded his head in agreement, stepping up beside his wife to join the public execution. "It is true," he declared to the crowd with a booming voice. "I am her father, and I am telling you right now that these two are nothing but leeches. We had to kick them out of our house just last night, because they were trying to sabotage our financial investments out of pure spite. They are an absolute embarrassment to our family name. Throw them out, officers. Throw them out into the street where they belong. Olivia stood right behind her parents, her arms crossed tight over her chest. She had a smug, victorious grin plastered across her face. She loved every single second of this public humiliation. She thought she was finally cementing her status as the superior daughter, the undisputed winner of the toxic family hierarchy. Desmond stood tall, looking incredibly pleased with himself. He had managed to turn the entire lobby against us without even breaking a sweat. "Are you quite finished?" Clara asked softly. Her voice was not loud, but it carried a sharp, icy authority that made Patricia momentarily pause her unhinged tirade. "How dare you speak to me with that tone?" Patricia hissed, her face turning a violent shade of red. "After everything you have done to humiliate us tonight, you do not get to act superior. You are a fired, broke, unemployed failure of a daughter." The security guard, sensing the situation was about to escalate into a physical altercation, finally moved in. "Sir, ma'am," one of the guards said, reaching out to firmly grasp my shoulder. "I need you to come with us right now. We do not want to make a scene." I did not move. I did not flinch. I calmly looked at the guard and then shifted my gaze to the grand entrance of the main ballroom directly behind Desmond. "I do not recommend touching me," I told the guard, my voice carrying a quiet but absolute command. "I promise you will be looking for a new job by tomorrow morning if you do." Desmond let out a loud, barking laugh. "Did you hear that?" he mocked, turning to the crowd. "The unemployed freelancer is threatening the security staff. Get him out of here before I call the police myself." The guard tightened his jaw and reached for my arm again. But before his fingers could even brush the fabric of my tailored suit, a loud and panicked voice cut through the tense atmosphere of the crowded lobby. "Stop right there. Do not lay a single finger on that man." The voice echoed off the marble walls with an authority that instantly froze the security guards in place. The heavy wooden doors of the main ballroom burst open, and a group of older men in immaculately tailored suits rushed out into the lobby. Leading the pack was Gregory, the senior chairman of the OmniTech board of directors. He looked absolutely terrified, his face pale and shining with a thin layer of sweat despite the cool air conditioning of the hotel. Right behind him was David, my head of internal security, who had clearly just alerted the board to what was happening outside. Desmond saw the board members approaching and immediately broke into a wide, confident smile. He completely misinterpreted their panic, assuming they had rushed out to personally greet their star executive and help him handle the unruly trespassers. Desmond stepped forward, puffing out his chest and buttoning his tuxedo jacket. He positioned himself squarely in front of me, eager to take control of the narrative. "Gregory, gentlemen, it is so good to see you," Desmond announced, holding his hand out for a firm handshake. "I apologize for the commotion out here. We just had a minor security issue with a couple of uninvited guests trying to crash the red carpet. My reckless brother-in-law and his wife decided to show up and cause a scene. I was just instructing hotel security to remove them so we can begin the evening." Gregory did not slow down. He did not extend his hand to meet Desmond's. In fact, he did not even look at his new chief executive officer. Gregory and the rest of the board members walked right past Desmond, as if he were completely invisible, leaving him standing there with his hand extended in empty air. The crowd of reporters and executives watched in absolute stunned silence as the group of powerful men bypassed the man of the hour and came to a sudden halt directly in front of me. Gregory took a deep breath, visibly trying to steady himself. He lowered his head in a deep, respectful bow. The other board members immediately followed suit, bowing their heads toward me in perfect unison. "Mr. Chairman," Gregory said, his voice trembling slightly, but loud enough for the entire lobby to hear. "I am so incredibly sorry for this unacceptable situation. We were waiting for you inside the private VIP lounge. We had no idea security was holding you at the door. Please accept my deepest apologies on behalf of the entire OmniTech board." The silence in the grand lobby was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop on the thick carpet. The two massive security guards who had been about to grab my arms took several rapid steps backward, their faces completely drained of color. Behind me, I heard a sharp intake of breath. I turned my head just slightly to see Patricia standing there with her mouth hanging wide open. Her hands were shaking violently. Richard looked like he had just been physically punched in the stomach. His eyes darted between Gregory and me, trying desperately to process the impossible scene playing out in front of him. Olivia had actually dropped her stolen white leather purse. It hit the marble floor with a dull thud, but she did not even bend down to pick it up. She was staring at Clara, who was standing beside me, radiating pure, untouchable grace. Desmond spun around, his face contorted in a mask of total confusion. He let out a nervous, breathless laugh. "Gregory, what are you doing?" Desmond stammered, stepping back toward the group. "Why are you apologizing to him? You are making a massive mistake. That is Nate. He is just a broke freelancer. He drives a 10-year-old car. He does not even have a real job." Gregory slowly turned around to face Desmond. The look of terror on the chairman's face vanished immediately, replaced by a look of profound disgust and blinding rage. "Are you completely out of your mind?" Gregory roared, his voice echoing loudly across the lobby. He pointed a shaking finger at my chest. "This man is not a freelancer. This is Nathaniel, the founder and majority shareholder of Aegis Holdings. He is the sole owner of the private equity firm that just acquired OmniTech. He personally authorized your hiring package. He owns this company, Desmond. He is your boss." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd of onlookers. The local business reporters standing behind the velvet ropes suddenly erupted into a frenzy, their cameras flashing rapidly as they turned their lenses away from Desmond and pointed them directly at Clara and me. The media had finally found their story. Desmond staggered backward as if Gregory had shoved him. The blood completely left his face, leaving his dark skin looking ashen and gray. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a terror that was deeply satisfying to witness. The reality of his situation was crashing down on him all at once. The man he had mocked, the man he had tried to bribe with a cheap envelope of cash, the man whose wife he had just maliciously fired, was the absolute ruler of his entire corporate universe. Desmond opened and closed his mouth silently, like a fish suffocating on dry land. He looked from Gregory to me, and back again, his brain completely short-circuiting as it tried to process the impossible truth standing right in front of him. The swaggering, arrogant posture he had maintained for months instantly evaporated, leaving his face deathly pale. He looked small, fragile, and utterly terrified. Gregory stood up straight, turning his back on Desmond entirely, and faced the massive crowd of reporters, investors, and OmniTech executives gathered in the lobby. He cleared his throat, projecting his voice with practiced, booming authority. "Ladies and gentlemen," Gregory announced, his words ringing out like a judge delivering a final verdict. "Please direct your attention and your utmost respect to Nathaniel. He is the founder of Aegis Holdings, and as of our recent acquisition, he is Mr. Chairman and majority owner of the OmniTech Corporation. Let us welcome him to this historic evening." A massive, deafening round of applause erupted from the gathered executives. It was immediately followed by a blinding, chaotic wave of camera flashes from the press line. The sound was overwhelming, a literal roar of corporate validation. But right in the middle of that roaring applause, a sharp, crystalline shatter cut through the noise with perfect clarity. I turned my head to the source of the sound. Olivia had just dropped her crystal champagne glass. It hit the hard marble floor, exploding into 100 glittering pieces. The expensive golden liquid splashed violently against her tight emerald dress and ruined her designer shoes. She did not even blink. Her eyes were completely glazed over with shock, her mouth hanging open in a silent scream of disbelief. The untouchable, arrogant socialite facade she had spent her entire adult life meticulously building had just been completely pulverized in a matter of seconds. Patricia looked like she was going to faint right there on the red carpet. She violently grabbed onto Richard's arm to steady herself, her chest heaving as her breath came in short, erratic gasps. Richard stared at me, his face caught in a grotesque mixture of sheer terror and desperate realization. He suddenly remembered the document he had aggressively signed on his dining room table just 24 hours ago. the home equity loan he had eagerly taken out to fund a secret tech project led by a man who was currently trembling in front of the actual owner of the company. Desmond took another wobbly step back, almost tripping over the thick velvet rope behind him. "Nate," he choked out, his voice reduced to a pathetic, high-pitched whisper that barely carried over the applause. "Nate, this has to be some kind of joke. Tell them it is a joke. You drive a rusted Ford. You live in a rental house. You wear cheap clothes." I did not raise my voice, but the absolute freezing coldness in my tone made him flinch as if I had struck him. "Wealth is quiet, Desmond," I told him evenly, my eyes locking onto his panicked gaze. "Only poor men feel the desperate need to shout about their money to convince strangers they matter. You spent your entire life trying to look rich while I spent mine actually building an empire." Gregory stepped forward, glaring at Desmond with pure contempt. "Mr. Chairman," Gregory said respectfully, keeping his eyes entirely on me, "do you want internal security to remove him from the premises right now? We can handle this quietly, before the keynote presentation begins, and save the board any further embarrassment." I looked at Desmond. His dark eyes were wide and pleading. He was silently begging me to let him go quietly, to spare him the ultimate public humiliation of being destroyed in front of the cameras. But I remembered the tears streaming down Clara's face when she came home holding that cardboard box. I remembered the greasy bag of takeout food sitting on my coffee table, offered as a mockery of our supposed poverty. "No, Gregory!" I said, my voice carrying clearly over the dying applause of the stunned crowd. "We are not doing anything quietly tonight. Desmond is our chief executive officer after all. He has prepared a very special keynote speech for all of our shareholders, and it would be incredibly rude to cancel his big moment in the spotlight." I offered my arm to Clara. She smiled a radiant, victorious smile and placed her hand gracefully on my forearm. "Let us proceed to the main ballroom," I announced to the board of directors. "And Desmond, I expect you to follow right behind me. We have a lot of financial details to review in front of the press." The trap was sprung. The heavy steel jaws had clamped down with bone-crushing force, and there was absolutely no escape. Desmond looked at the two massive security guards who just minutes ago had been ready to throw me out on his orders. Now they were staring at him with cold, hard professionalism, silently waiting for him to step out of line so they could physically drag him inside. Patricia suddenly lunged forward, desperately reaching out toward Clara. "Clara, sweetheart." Patricia cried out, her voice dripping with a sickly sweet fake affection that made my stomach turn. "Sweetheart, please, you have to explain this to us. We had no idea. We are your family." Clara did not even break her stride. She looked at her mother with complete and utter indifference. "You made your choice, Mom," Clara said smoothly, echoing a sentiment of long overdue justice. "Now you get to live with it." We walked through the grand brass doors and into the spectacular main ballroom, leaving the shattered pieces of their arrogance scattered behind us on the marble floor. We walked through the grand brass doors and into the spectacular main ballroom, leaving the shattered pieces of their arrogance scattered behind us on the marble floor. The interior of the ballroom was nothing short of breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceilings, casting a warm golden glow over hundreds of round tables draped in black silk. The absolute elite of the tech industry were already seated, murmuring in hushed tones as they waited for the keynote address. The entire front row was reserved for the OmniTech executive board and their distinguished VIP guests. I guided Clara to the center table, pulling out a plush velvet chair for her right next to Chairman Gregory. She sat down with the poise of an absolute queen, smoothing the fabric of her sapphire gown. Desmond, meanwhile, was ushered to the very same table by the two security guards who had followed us inside. He collapsed into his chair, his legs seemingly unable to support his own weight. Olivia and my in-laws had slinked in right behind him. Their faces were pale and drawn, and they took their seats at the edge of the front row, looking exactly like condemned prisoners, waiting for the executioner to arrive. I walked up the short flight of carpeted steps and stood behind the sleek acrylic podium. The murmuring in the massive room instantly died down. Hundreds of faces looked up at me, eager to hear the vision of the mysterious man who had just bought their company. I adjusted the microphone. I looked directly down at Desmond. He was staring blindly at the floor, a thick bead of cold sweat rolling down the side of his face. "Good evening," I said, my voice echoing clearly through the massive ballroom speakers. "As Chairman Gregory so kindly announced, my name is Nathaniel. My firm recently acquired OmniTech because we saw immense potential in the corporate infrastructure. However, an acquisition is only as strong as the leadership trusted to manage it." I paused, letting the silence hang heavy in the air. "Our new Chief Executive Officer Desmond spoke to the press on the red carpet just a few moments ago," I continued smoothly. "He promised aggressive growth. He promised that we were trimming the dead weight and making bold, visionary investments. I agree with that vision entirely. Transparency is the cornerstone of any successful enterprise. So in the spirit of absolute transparency, I decided to scrap my standard corporate greeting tonight. Instead, I want to share exactly what kind of bold investments our executive leadership has been making behind closed doors." I looked toward the back of the room and nodded at David, who was standing near the audiovisual booth. "Execute," I said softly into the microphone. Instantly, the massive theater-sized LED screens hanging behind the stage flickered to life. The crowd expected to see a slick corporate logo or a chart detailing projected quarterly profits. Instead, they saw a highly detailed, itemized forensic financial ledger. The room erupted into confused whispers as the glaring numbers filled the screens. I used a digital laser pointer to highlight specific lines of data. "Right here," I announced, pointing to a massive red highlight. "We have a corporate expense filed just 3 days ago for a team-building retreat at the Emerald Cove Golf Resort. The cost was heavily inflated to cover a $4,000 a night penthouse suite, luxury VIP spa treatments, and curiously, a $4,850 designer handbag classified as a client gift." Dozens of executives turned in their seats to glare directly at Desmond. Olivia physically shrank in her chair, trying desperately to hide the white leather bag completely out of sight under the black silk tablecloth. But the visual ledgers were just the warm-up. "But luxury vacations are relatively small change." I continued, my voice hardening into ice. "Let us talk about the real visionary investments. Let us talk about the fabricated internal funding known as Project Apex and the $3 million server upgrades. Yesterday morning, I had the distinct pleasure of acting as Desmond's caddy on the 9th hole. It gave me a wonderful opportunity to learn exactly how he negotiates external vendor contracts." David played the audio file. The massive screen shifted to a simple pulsing audio waveform graphic. Then Desmond's own arrogant voice boomed through the state-of-the-art surround sound system. The recording was crystal clear. Everyone in the room heard him explicitly demand a $500,000 kickback. They heard him instruct the supplier to route the stolen funds into a secret offshore consulting firm. They heard him laugh with sickening pride about his own corruption. The silence in the room was absolute as the recording played. Board members sitting at the surrounding tables dropped their silver forks. Waiters stopped pouring wine. The journalists in the back of the room were typing frantically on their laptops, capturing every single explosive second of the corporate scandal of the decade. Desmond gripped the edge of the table so tightly, his knuckles turned completely white. He shook his head back and forth, muttering frantic denials that no one could hear over the sound of his own recorded extortion. The trap had not just sprung, it had completely obliterated him. The trap had not just sprung, it had completely obliterated him. But a narcissist who has built his entire identity on a foundation of lies does not simply accept defeat when the truth is revealed. Instead of lowering his head in shame, Desmond snapped. He violently shoved his chair backward, sending it crashing to the marble floor with a loud crack. He scrambled to his feet and charged up the short flight of carpeted stairs toward the stage, his face twisted in a mask of absolute desperation and fury. "It is a lie!" Desmond screamed, his voice cracking as he lunged toward the acrylic podium. He reached out with both hands, frantically trying to snatch the microphone away from me. It is a deep fake. Do not listen to him. It is artificial intelligence. The two massive hotel security guards who had escorted him into the ballroom immediately rushed forward, ready to tackle him to the stage floor. But I simply held up my hand, signaling them to stop. I did not need physical protection from a coward. I smoothly stepped to the side, maintaining my grip on the microphone stand, and allowed Desmond to stand in front of the massive crowd. He was panting heavily, his custom tuxedo wrinkled, and his expensive silk tie askew. "He is trying to frame me," Desmond yelled into the microphone, pointing a shaking finger directly at my face. "He is my brother-in-law. He is insanely jealous of my success. He used his tech company to generate a fake audio file to ruin my career because his own wife just got fired and they are completely broke. This is a targeted assassination of my character. You cannot believe a single word he says." The ballroom remained dead silent. The board of directors sitting in the front row looked at Desmond as if he had just lost his mind. Chairman Gregory shook his head in absolute disgust. The media cameras continued to flash rapidly, capturing every bead of sweat rolling down his panicked face. I let him stand there for a full 10 seconds, letting the sheer absurdity of his defense hang heavily in the air. I looked down at Clara in the front row. She was watching her brother-in-law self-destruct with a look of perfect, serene satisfaction. "Are you quite finished?" I asked quietly, stepping back up to the podium and reclaiming my space. Desmond glared at me, his chest heaving. "It is a fake," he repeated stubbornly, though his voice lacked any real conviction. He was clinging to the only excuse he could think of, no matter how ridiculous it sounded. "A deepfake audio file is certainly a creative excuse," Desmond, I said smoothly, turning my attention back to the hundreds of faces in the crowd. "But unfortunately for you, artificial intelligence did not open an offshore consulting firm in the Cayman Islands under your direct Social Security number. Artificial intelligence did not digitally sign a $3 million vendor authorization using your secure corporate credentials. And artificial intelligence certainly did not transfer $500,000 into that offshore account at exactly 9 o'clock this morning." I gestured to the audio-visual booth again. The massive LED screens behind us shifted instantly. The audio waveform vanished, replaced by a high-resolution image of Desmond's actual banking records. The screen displayed the exact wire transfers complete with timestamps, OmniTech routing numbers, and Desmond's verified digital signature. There was absolute undeniable proof of the embezzlement laid bare for every single investor and reporter to see. A loud wave of murmurs swept through the room. Investors whispered angrily to one another. Desmond stared at the screens, his mouth opening and closing silently. The desperate fight completely drained out of him, leaving behind nothing but the hollow shell of a ruined man. He slowly lowered his pointing finger, his eyes darting frantically around the room, looking for an exit that did not exist. "Desmond," I said, my voice cutting through the heavy silence with absolute lethal precision. "Your actions represent a catastrophic breach of trust, a gross violation of corporate ethics, and a federal crime. As the majority owner and chairman of this company, I am terminating your employment as Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately." A loud gasp rippled through the audience. Olivia buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. Richard sat frozen, his face devoid of all color as the reality of his own financial ruin settled in. Furthermore, I continued, showing absolutely no mercy. "Because your termination is for gross misconduct and criminal fraud, your executive contract is officially voided. You will receive no severance package. All of your unvested stock options are permanently revoked. Your corporate credit cards have already been deactivated. And the items you fraudulently purchased with company funds, including the penthouse suite at Emerald Cove and the designer handbag currently sitting on your wife's lap, are now considered stolen corporate property and must be surrendered immediately." Desmond staggered backward, practically leaning against the massive LED screen for support. "You cannot do this to me," he whispered miserably, though the microphone picked it up perfectly. "I have a family. I have a reputation. You destroyed your own reputation the moment you decided to steal, I replied coldly. And as for your family, I suggest you prepare them for a very difficult transition, because your corporate career is officially over. But unfortunately for you, the consequences of your actions are just beginning. I looked past Desmond signaling David near the back doors of the ballroom. Send them in. Send them in. The heavy brass doors at the very back of the ballroom swung open with a resounding thud. The security detail stationed at the entrance immediately stepped aside, clearing a wide path down the center aisle. 6 individuals walked into the room. They were not wearing tailored tuxedos or designer gowns. They wore dark utilitarian windbreakers with 3 large, bright yellow letters printed across their backs. FBI. The collective gasp that rose from the audience was deafening. The crowd of billionaires, tech executives, and high-profile investors scrambled out of the way, practically climbing over their silk-draped tables to put as much distance between themselves and the incoming federal agents as possible. The agents moved with precise, practiced coordination, their expressions completely unreadable. Desmond stood frozen near the edge of the stage, his eyes wide and unblinking as he watched the agents march directly toward him. The last remaining shreds of his arrogance evaporated, leaving nothing but raw, unfiltered terror. He looked like a deer caught in the headlights of an oncoming freight train. Olivia let out a high-pitched shriek, scrambling backward in her chair. She knocked over her crystal water glass, but she did not even notice the cold liquid spilling onto her lap. Richard and Patricia sat completely paralyzed in the front row, their faces drained of all color. They were witnessing the spectacular absolute destruction of the man they had practically worshipped just an hour prior. The lead agent, a tall man with a stern face and sharp eyes, stepped up to the front table. He did not look at the massive LED screens broadcasting the financial crimes, and he did not look at the sea of flashing cameras from the press pool. He looked directly at the man trembling in the custom-tailored midnight blue tuxedo. "Are you Desmond, the lead agent?" asked his voice, cutting through the chaotic murmuring of the ballroom with absolute authority. Desmond tried to speak, but his throat completely seized up. He could only manage a frantic, jerky nod, the sweat glistening on his dark skin under the bright chandeliers. "Desmond, I have a federal warrant for your arrest," the agent announced, clearly pulling a folded document from the inside pocket of his jacket. "You are being charged with multiple counts of federal wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and extortion. Turn around and place your hands behind your back." "No, please," Desmond whimpered, taking a clumsy step backward. His polished leather shoe caught the edge of the thick carpet, and he stumbled, barely keeping his balance. "Please, there has to be a misunderstanding. I have the money. I can put the money back. Just give me a few days to fix this." The pathetic admission of guilt echoed loudly through the room, captured perfectly by the dozen news cameras still rolling at the back of the ballroom. Any potential defense lawyer watching the live broadcast just lost their entire case in a matter of seconds. "Turn around?" The agent repeated his tone, leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. 2 other agents stepped forward, flanking Desmond on both sides so he could not run. Desmond looked desperately up at me, standing behind the acrylic podium. "Nate, please," he begged, tears finally spilling over his eyelashes and streaming down his cheeks. "Nate, we are family. You cannot let them do this to me. Tell them to stop. I will do whatever you want. I will apologize to Clara. I will apologize to you right now in front of everyone. Please do not send me to prison." I looked down at the broken man, begging for mercy. "You threatened to ruin my wife's career, and then you actually did it," I said, my voice cold and unwavering. "You threatened to destroy my reputation and force me onto the street. You do not get to play the family card when you are the one who deliberately set the house on fire." Seeing that I offered zero sympathy, Desmond spun around to face his father-in-law. "Richard, do something," Desmond cried out. "Tell them who I am. Tell them about our investment project. Tell them I am good for the money." Richard violently recoiled, pressing his back hard against his chair, as if Desmond was covered in a highly contagious disease. He did not say a single word. He refused to even make eye contact with the man who had just swindled him out of his family home. The federal agents did not wait any longer. They grabbed Desmond by the arms, forcibly turning him around. The sharp metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs locking securely around his wrists sounded incredibly loud in the quiet room. The cold metal pressed harshly against the expensive fabric of his custom tuxedo, a stark contrast between the illusion of wealth and the brutal reality of his criminal choices. "You have the right to remain silent," the lead agent began reciting the Miranda warning as they started to march Desmond up the center aisle. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Desmond did not remain silent. He sobbed loudly, a humiliating, ugly sound that echoed over the rhythmic clicking of the cameras. He hung his head in absolute shame as the agents escorted him past the hundreds of elite guests he had been so desperate to impress. He walked past the reporters, past the flashing lights, and out through the heavy brass doors of the ballroom. His multi-million-dollar corporate empire had lasted exactly 3 weeks, and it ended with him taking a perp walk in handcuffs. His multi-million-dollar corporate empire had lasted exactly 3 weeks, and it ended with him taking a perp walk in handcuffs. The heavy brass doors swung shut, cutting off the frantic flashes of the press cameras. Inside the grand ballroom, a collective exhale swept through the crowd. I stepped away from the podium, gesturing for David to cut the feed to the massive LED screens. The financial ledgers vanished, replaced by the standard OmniTech corporate logo. The board of directors immediately began damage control, directing the executives toward the open bar and assuring them that Aegis Holdings was fully in control of the transition. But at the center table in the front row, there was only absolute devastation. Olivia was still sitting in her chair, staring blankly at the shattered crystal on the floor. She was completely catatonic, her mind unable to comprehend that she was now the wife of a disgraced federal inmate. Right next to her, Richard and Patricia were experiencing a completely different kind of nightmare. Richard was staring at the blank screen where Desmond's offshore accounts had just been displayed. His breathing became shallow and rapid. I could literally see the exact moment his brain connected the dots. Just yesterday morning, Richard had taken out a massive home equity line of credit against his fully paid-off house. He had wired $300,000 directly into what he thought was Project Apex. But I had explicitly instructed David to freeze all incoming wire transfers the second they hit the OmniTech servers. "My money," Richard gasped, gripping his thinning hair. "Patricia, the money, the house." Patricia snapped her head toward her husband, her face twisting in pure panic. "What do you mean the house?" she demanded. "Desmond said it was a guaranteed investment. He said we would be millionaires by Christmas." "There is no investment," Richard yelled, his voice cracking with hysteria. "He was stealing from the company. He took our money to cover his tracks. The federal government just froze all of his accounts. We owe the bank $300,000, Patricia. We are going to lose the house." Patricia let out a horrified wail, her hands covering her mouth. The reality of their blind greed had finally caught up with them. They had willingly handed over the deed to their family home to a con artist just to brag at the country club. And now they had absolutely nothing. Richard suddenly snapped his head up and looked directly at the stage. He saw me standing next to Clara. The man he had called a 34-year-old failure and a jealous parasite was actually a billionaire who controlled the accounts where his money was currently trapped. Richard grabbed Patricia's arm, dragging her up the carpeted stairs toward the stage. They completely abandoned Olivia, leaving their beloved golden child sobbing alone. They rushed toward Clara, their faces morphed into masks of desperate pleading. "Clara, sweetheart." Patricia cried, reaching out to grab her daughter's hands. Clara instinctively took a step back, refusing the touch. "Please, you have to help us. Desmond tricked us. We are going to be completely homeless." Richard stepped forward, his pride entirely broken. "Nate, I am so sorry," Richard stammered, his voice trembling. "I was incredibly wrong about you. You have to understand, Desmond lied to us. You control OmniTech now. You can just authorize a refund. Just release the frozen funds back to my bank account. Or since you own Aegis Holdings, you could just pay off the mortgage for us. $300,000 is nothing to a man like you." Clara stared at her parents. She looked at the people who had stood in the hotel lobby just 20 minutes ago and loudly announced to a crowd of reporters that she was a broke embarrassment. "You want a bailout?" Clara asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "You want my husband to hand you $300,000 to save your house?" "Yes," Patricia sobbed, nodding frantically. "Please, Clara. We are your family. We are your parents. You cannot let us lose everything." Clara stood incredibly tall. "Family," she repeated the word tasting like poison. "Family does not let a man maliciously fire their daughter and then show up at her house to laugh about it. Family does not threaten to disinherit their child over a hotel room. You made it perfectly clear last night that Desmond and Olivia were your only real family. You placed your bets on the wrong horse because you value money over absolutely everything else." "But Clara, we made a mistake," Richard pleaded. "We did not know." "You knew exactly who you were being," Clara replied, her voice turning to pure ice. "You just did not know you were picking on the billionaire. You are not sorry for how you treated us. You are just sorry you got caught backing a criminal. The federal government has your money now, Dad. I suggest you get a very good bankruptcy lawyer." Clara turned her back on them without another word. She linked her arm through mine, her head held high, and completely walked away from the people who had spent her entire life making her feel completely worthless. Clara turned her back on them without another word. She linked her arm through mine, her head held high, and completely walked away from the people who had spent her entire life making her feel completely worthless. We took a few steps down the carpeted aisle, but Richard was not ready to accept his fate. He lunged forward, his heavy footsteps thudding against the floorboards. "Nate, wait!" he shouted, his voice cracking with a pathetic desperation that made several nearby executives turn away in secondhand embarrassment. "You cannot just leave us like this. We are ruined. The bank is going to take everything we have built." I stopped walking. I gently patted Clara's hand, which was still resting securely on my arm, and turned back to face my father-in-law. Richard was sweating profusely, his expensive tuxedo now looking like a cheap costume on a broken man. Patricia was still crying by the table, leaning heavily against a chair for support. Olivia had not moved an inch, her eyes still glued to the shattered crystal on the floor. I reached into the inner pocket of my bespoke charcoal suit. I felt the thick, crisp edges of the paper inside. I slowly pulled out the exact same white envelope that Desmond had slid across the table at the high-end restaurant just a few days ago. The envelope he had offered as a mocking stimulus package for my supposedly pathetic life. I held the envelope up so Richard could see it clearly under the bright ballroom chandeliers. "Do you recognize this, Richard?" I asked, my voice carrying a quiet, lethal calm. "This is the $10,000 Desmond tried to use to humiliate me. He handed this to me while you sat there and laughed. You told me to take it. You told me to use it to pay off the debts I had drowned your daughter in. You told me to try and act like a real man." Richard stared at the white envelope, his mouth opening and closing wordlessly. He looked like he wanted to reach out and grab it, but the absolute disgust in my eyes kept his hands glued to his sides. "I am a real man, Richard." I continued, my words striking him like physical blows. "And a real man protects his family. Clara is my family. You and your wife lost the right to call yourselves her family the moment you decided to treat her like a second-class citizen. You chased the illusion of wealth, and you backed a criminal because he drove a nice car and bought you expensive dinners. You sold your own soul and your own house for a front-row seat to a corporate scam." I stepped closer to him, looking down at his terrified, sweating face. "I am not going to pay off your mortgage. I am not going to bail you out. I am going to let you experience the exact same poverty you constantly mocked me for. But because I am actually a generous man, I will give you a parting gift." I tossed the thick white envelope. It hit Richard's chest and dropped to the floor, landing squarely at the tips of his polished leather shoes. "Take the money, Richard," I said coldly. "You are going to need every single penny to hire a competent bankruptcy lawyer. And I highly suggest you find a good defense attorney for Olivia, because the federal government is going to want to know exactly how much she knew about her husband's stolen corporate credit cards. Richard fell to his knees, his hands trembling as he reached down to pick up the envelope of cash. He looked utterly defeated, kneeling on the floor of the grand ballroom, while the elite executives he had wanted to impress looked down at him with pure contempt. I turned my back on him for the final time. Clara and I walked up the center aisle, the crowd naturally parting to let us through. We walked out the heavy brass doors, leaving the chaos and the crying behind us. We stepped out into the cool night air, ignoring the shouting reporters and the flashing cameras. My driver was waiting with the door of the luxury car open. We climbed inside the heavy doors, shutting out the noise of the city completely. In the months that followed, Desmond was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for wire fraud and embezzlement. Richard and Patricia lost their massive house to foreclosure and had to move into a tiny rented apartment. Olivia filed for divorce, her reputation completely destroyed, forced to get a minimum-wage retail job just to survive. Clara and I simply lived our lives in peace, building our empire and focusing on the family we chose to create. The greatest revenge is not anger, it is absolute, untouchable success. If you have ever had to cut toxic family members out of your life to protect your own peace, let me know in the comments below. Please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories about standing up for your worth. Thank you for listening, and remember that you never have to tolerate disrespect just because it comes from people who share your blood. The story of Nate and Clara serves as a powerful reminder that true wealth is rooted in character, not in the loud, desperate display of stolen status. Desmond built an empire entirely on lies, using leased cars, corporate credit cards, and a manufactured persona to demand unearned respect. Richard and Patricia were so blinded by the allure of this shallow prestige that they willingly sacrificed their own daughter's dignity and ultimately their own financial security just to sit at the table of the elite. They confused arrogance with competence and flashy spending with actual success. The most profound lesson here is that you cannot buy genuine respect, and you should never compromise your own boundaries to appease people who only value you conditionally. Clara and Nate endured relentless humiliation, not because they lacked resources, but because they understood that quiet confidence always outlasts loud insecurities. When the truth finally surfaced, Desmond's fragile house of cards collapsed, taking his enablers down with it. The family members who worshipped money were left with absolutely nothing, while the couple who valued integrity walked away with their peace and their empire intact. This narrative teaches us that blood relations do not grant a free pass for toxic behavior, emotional abuse, or blatant disrespect. Sometimes the most empowering financial and emotional decision you can make is to stop seeking validation from people who are committed to misunderstanding you. You have to recognize when a relationship, even a familial one, is bankrupting your spirit. Protect your peace fiercely, build your life on a steady foundation of honesty, and never let anyone make you feel inferior for choosing quiet integrity over loud deception. Evaluate the relationships in your own life and bravely step away from anyone who costs you your self-respect.